Well, I get to be the first comment on the recording.
That's just right in me.
This is the official opinion now. So no, I completely agree with everything that Heather said in terms of this being the end goal, and I think everything that Ricardo indicated. Where if we think about the value proposition of everything this community is doing between Anuket and CNCF, it's entirely intending to allow that, for lack of a better word, but like that app store feel, to deploying, these workloads onto a more common infrastructure. And I think that starts with, a lot of the work that's been done on, getting a uniform set of requirements and a uniform set of, tests and evaluation to the infrastructure piece of it that's hosting the workload. And then the second part that, I think is the complex question that, I'm hoping we're able to discuss a little bit today of how do we define the requirements setting and, kind of evaluation or testing of the workload itself, so we can start to put those two pieces together to kind of deliver that final total value.
Yeah, and I just thought of one kind of additional thing. I think one of the great things about CNCF is it's such a vibrant place where so much innovation happens, but kind of going back to this interoperability issue, sometimes that's challenging. And I think kind of towards what, Ricardo was saying, like a convergence, I think that, we might be a bit more opinionated from the telecom as a vertical market sort of point of view, but not necessarily so opinionated that we miss out on innovation, but enough that we get away from the one app to one Kubernetes, choice problem, and that we have good interoperability. As Lincoln was just saying, that that kind of convergence app store, not quite, but that sort of mentality.
We got to go one more step, Heather. So like, here's the thing. Yes, there's if you look at like the amount of projects in the CNCF, at this point it gets a little bit confusing. But the reality of the matter is, if you go and look, everybody says you can only run on their Kubernetes with their application, and yet they'll come with the exact same bill of materials from a component list. It's going to be Kubernetes, like 1.18 and newer. It's going to be, some type of standard like log forwarder, probably Fluentd or one of them. It's going to be Multis most likely if you're going to do a multiplexer. Everybody keeps saying like interoperability, and then they all come with the exact same stack, but it's somehow special because it's theirs. When we say that something like meets Anuket, like here's the thing, like if Anthos, EKS Anywhere, Rancher, OpenShift, Tanzu, if all of them are quote unquote, meeting the reference architecture, then our stance from the CNF side is that, the CNF should run in it, right? And the devil's always in the details. And so what you find out is it's way less about the Kubernetes stack, and it's way more people concerned about the old NFEI discussions of, what kind of SLA and SLO can I provide? Am I going to get the performance out of this that I want from my packet core? Does your VMware or OpenStack infrastructure give me the, oomph that I need? Oh, this service provider is going full hipster and they're doing just bare metal Kubernetes. Like, those are the kind of details, but we get into all these, like it can only be my Kubernetes, and I'm like, but it's still just Kubernetes, and you're even running the same version as the one I'm using. So like, why can't I run my Kubernetes with your application?
Yeah.
But I think the trick is that there are like gazillions of configuration parameters and like quote unquote extensions to Kubernetes. So even if the big like components are the same, like of course everybody is using Kubernetes, but if you go down to, I don't know, CNI or CSI level, or the list of operators installed in the cluster, there are big differences between these two. And the problem for us CNF vendors is that now the differences are so big that we need to provide practically a different CNF for every platform.
I'll agree and disagree. So the operators thing is definitely something I think this combined group should tackle. But like the CNI thing keeps coming up. Like I said, at this point, like there's been winners and losers. Like it's probably Multis, it's probably Mac VLAN, it's probably Calico, it's probably Cilium. I mean, I'm not saying that's always the case. In service providers, there's always going to be the one that's like, oh, I want to do it with Calico VPP or something weird. And I mean, we can't account for every single one, but like even the CNI thing, like if you go into the manifest and the Helm charts, like I can take two different like vendors, hold them up side by side, and they talk about configuration, and like 99% of the configs are the same. Like I said, it's other than the operators where things get really weird, and that definitely needs to be addressed. Like we are having all these discussions, and what I find what they're more worried about is, what are we doing with privileged containers? It always comes back down to the NFVI layer. They're like, oh, we're running Kubernetes this and that, but it's special because this is how we're configuring the virtual infrastructure underneath. And maybe they're doing that with an operator through Kubernetes, but it's still like some standard version of the Kubernetes API. It's one of three CNIs or some amalgamation of them with Multis. And, it's a standard, stack for monitoring and logging. Like this is where it gets weird, right? It's like outside of very niche stuff, which is what we should probably focus on, is like, how are you doing SRV interfaces into a pod? Are you running your data plane in Kubernetes? And then things get like a little bit hairy, but then once again, it goes right back to NFVI of like, how is the infrastructure providing Kates these resources?
Yeah, I think that's the domain what we are in. So of course, like, let's say easy workloads are easy to run, and the problem is not with those. We are talking about the user plane workloads, and we are talking about SRIOVs and low latency.
No, I'm with you. And so this comes back to my very first question. If a vendor who provides a stack comes to me and says, I meet the reference architecture of Anuket, and I have a CNF vendor who says I can run on something that's built to the reference architecture, then in my mind, even though I know the reality is it's not this simple, but in my mind, then that should be the end of the discussion. If I have a compliant platform and a CNF that runs on the compliant platform, I should get to pick which one of those two things they are if they're compliant.
That is our dream plan. Yes. We are not there yet, though.
And I think right now, one of the areas we're struggling too is, I guess, maybe what to say to the CNF sort of vendors in terms of requirements. And maybe we should just start with, run on the sort of, on an Anuket R2 compliant platform. Here's how to, install, run, test your CNF on that platform, and then come back. And I think part of what we're struggling is what requirement level should we sort of hand to the sort of CNF vendors, or is it more of the requirements on the platform and we need to work through a few more of the thorny issues, and we just say, CNF vendors, prove that you can do this, and there's some very basic sort of requirements in testing. I don't know. Look, I'm not the technical person, but I think that part of the thing too is we're sort of struggling with sort of what are the requirements levels on the CNFs themselves, and should it be better specification of the platform and some basic testing to sort of prove that, or are there sort of more specific sort of CNF vendor requirements as opposed to and in addition to the platform requirements? I don't know, Ricardo, would you agree with that from an RA perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's also a thing that's in my day job, really. So yes, the clarity on the platform requirements and having this sort of platform approach. It's obviously the way in which you clarify what can be consumed by workloads, and yeah. So I don't see it only in Anuket, but I also see it in my day-to-day job, really.
Okay, then let's jump a bit to like discussing about what kind of different projects and activities do we have, and what is the scope of this. Yeah. So we already discussed a bit about Anuket array 2, I think that is clear that in array 2 we are defining requirements in theory both to the platform and the workloads. However, our workload chapter is very, how to put it, empty at the moment. But I think we will work on that in the future. And on the other side, on the CNCF side, we have the CNF conformance test, which is basically like defining requirements to the CNF. So there is a bit of an overlap between these two already. But as far as I followed, even in CNF conformance, there are not too many best practices merged yet. I think it's the don't use privileged containers once is the only one which is merged and agreed. Do I remember correctly, Taylor?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit different at this point, so maybe this is a good segue to talk about what's current on the CNCF telecom side. So there's for folks that don't know, I think most everyone knows, there's 4 initiatives right now in CNCF that are telecom related. Telecom user group, the CNF test bed, CNF test suite, and the CNF working group. The 2 most active ones are the working group and the test suite. And the way that I think it's maybe a little bit easier to think about those 2 initiatives is they're both intending to be part of helping people adopt best practices. And that could be used for many different places. You could use each one of them by themselves, standalone. They can be integrated. There was some initial integration in RC2 for the platform test, actually. But again, we're focused on workload, and that's where most of the tests have been. So anyways, the test suite is a tool that can be used to check. We'll just focus on the applications themselves that are running on Kubernetes. Now, of course, there's a gray line, but let's not focus on that part. Most of it is just think the applications that are in workloads that are running on Kubernetes. And they're looking at, we could say, best practices that'll help you take advantage of the Kubernetes framework and platform, just how to utilize it. It doesn't mean that it's the choice you should make. You may have other reasons, but when you're looking to say, what are the ways that I can most efficiently use Kubernetes and take advantage of not just the technology, but I will say the philosophies and methodologies that are driving it. That's the idea with the test suite. And the working group, what it's doing is supplemental documentation. So a lot of the documentation, the large majority, I would say, of the activities have been creating user stories, use cases, and definitions and other material so that we would have context and a way to talk about what's happening in different domains and how we can share stuff across domains, but then specifically to pull stuff into the telecom domain. And can this be applied? Is this valuable? Is this useful? So a lot of it's been there. Yes, Gergely, you're right. As far as the best practices go, in the working group, the write-ups there have been pretty minimal. And I think a lot of that had to do with how do we get to a point where people have enough shared understanding of the different terminology across the different areas, including Kubernetes, that we can actually write those up and it makes sense. What has been happening though, and so this is probably the most current thing to get y'all up to date on, is we now have over 50 workload tests in the test suite. And these are based on input from a lot of different areas. I will point out that probably the two biggest areas are in security, where we've had multiple companies and I guess CNCF projects that have been contributing into the security area. So expanding in the least privileges and stuff like that, trying to cover stuff like any type of security notices that have been going out that you need to get patched, or we still see stuff running with older versions. Jeffrey mentioned V118, but maybe someone's running older, or maybe you need to update to 20 if you're running something. So availability, resilience, that sort of thing, that would be another really big area where we've had contributions from people that are building projects and applications, platforms testing for resilience on Kubernetes. That's what they're doing. And so we have a lot of tests in there. And in the last, I would say, 6 months, there's been a big update in the documentation for the test suite that goes around the test and why they're important, what it's doing, why it's important. So when you look at one of those least privileges, you can say, okay, this is what it's checking, why we're saying to do this, what it's recommending, and then any type of remediation. So again, go back, the test suite is a tool to try to help with improving specifically the applications. So we've been trying to look at how do we communicate not just why and why it's testing, how it's testing, but also if something is failing and we go, hey, this looks like a bad thing that's happening here, then what can you do about it? So then we can reference different things. I can stop there for a minute. There's a few other big things, but I'll stop there because that was a big dump to catch up on.
Thank you.
I have a question or two. Sorry, you go first, Gergely.
One request. Can you post the link with the test case descriptions to the chat so I can add it to the meeting notes?
Yeah, probably the best for that is the usage guide. And I will post that. Here we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the usage guide is going to be updated the soonest whenever new tests are coming in. For instance, a project called Cubescape, I don't know if y'all are familiar with that. They've done a lot of stuff with the NIST security agency group, where there's a lot of a big list of recommended practices to do in a Kubernetes environment and what to check for. And so they have a lot of tests around that, covering most of those items that are listed in the NIST Kubernetes hardening guide, along with a whole lot of other tests. So if we have a test coming in from them, a new one, because they're adding new ones all the time, and we're like, that one looks like it's relevant to us. They're trying to add stuff that would be relevant in the networking world as well, specifically. Then we will get the test coming in, and we'll also have documentation that goes in the usage guide. After that, after it goes in the usage guide, then we try to expand on it and pull that over, and we may end up with, well, we need some use cases and user stories that are expanded on and maybe even more telecom specific so that we understand how it's related. And that's where that supplemental content going in the working group comes in handy. And of course, the long term on the working group, which I think this would be similar to probably anywhere else, it's organic to have those best practices will end up getting more and more documentation. We'll have a large set published in the working group eventually, but with that large amount of context that we're seeing, like on the least privileged non-root user for processes that we have in there, that has a lot of context, but that's a lot to actually write it up. So we'll have agreement. Everyone said, yeah, non-root, it's good. We all agree it's a best practice. Okay, as a guide. Well, now let's write it up. And okay, well, that took a long time because there's a lot of content to explain something. If you're familiar with math, when you do explaining addition or anything, can end up being 20 pages using other terminology in math. So that's how I'd kind of look at the working group. It's trailing behind on what the test suite is publishing based on expertise in different areas coming in to provide input, have all the references, and then we move it forward. And then the working group will end up having the list eventually. I do want to mention, I don't want to go into it, but I do want to talk with y'all about the certification conformance that you were mentioned, so we can talk about how that's related. And there is a Telco Days CNCF thing that's coming up, so I want to mention that before we run out of time. But we can talk about that in a minute. Heather, I think you had a comment.
Yeah.
And Gergely, if you were done,
Yeah.
if I answered you.
Gergely, do you have any other questions before we jump to me? I don't want to cut you off.
No, I'm okay. Thanks.
Okay. So in terms of kind of where some of the requirements are coming from, it seems as though they're coming from people that care about things like security. So it's coming from sort of, I think maybe more of the kind of like from the technical creation experts, perhaps a little bit more than end users. And that's not to say one is better than the other, but just so I kind of understand sort of the process a little bit, because
there was a big group of us like on the provider side, Heather,
okay,
that contributed to these. So like, and I mean, security was like low-hanging fruit, but I mean,
yeah,
once again, there's things that are uniquely CSP, right? So
yeah,
and we specifically, what we're not trying to do is a generic app conformance thing, right? Like there are security considerations though that are unique to CSP. So for one, Gergely talking about some of the low latency user plane stuff. Almost every single one of those wants to use a privileged container. So what are the best practices for enabling, communication to the kernel and then relinquishing that privilege when you no longer need it because you've set up your thing, or you call it out and say, look, like this is just, the pay to entry, like you have to have this because this is how, these low level functions work. Things like air gapped environments, right? Like most providers do not allow public internet access directly to their CSP networks, right? So like you said, I mean, I don't want it to be confused that, these are just generic app conformance things. They do come from like the mindset of, CNFs are trying to do things that like you probably aren't going to have to deal with web scale apps in Amazon or Google. And so I just wanted to make that distinction.
Yeah. Well, and that was sort of, you began to answer for me my follow-up question, which is how much of this is kind of specific to an NF as opposed to a Kubernetes workload. And I think you started touching on that there's some things that are definitely generic, but then there are definitely some things that are CNF, i.e. kind of service provider specific. But I think someone else was about to ask a question.
Sorry, no, I was just about to ask simple, ignorant questions. So are these tests meant to be run by operators in a continuous testing sort of environment, or is your intention to have the actual CNF developers to run them and then have a rubber stamp saying, okay, I passed the tests, here's my results, and pass you the artifacts with the results. What is the intention here?
So I guess the just to repeat one thing, it's the CNF test suite, open source, public tool, so it could be used for many different things. But the I guess most of the activity right now would be trying to help creators. So any of the developers that are doing it, Oliver could probably speak to that from the Matrix standpoint, but trying to help them, while the goal is actually to first listen to and gather information from the service provider's perspective. The end goal is the consumption of the applications. So when we're looking at stuff and talking about resilience, we're not saying, hey, we want this one app to be resilient. We're looking at resilience that will bring value and lower operational efforts and cost
Also,
the
for
service
context,
providers.
yeah, and I don't know if, I already have the vendor stink on me since I've been out of charter for 2 whole months, but for, just anecdotal thought, like what I would do is I pulled the test suite into our labs at Charter where we do all of our integration and validation. I'll be honest, I pick and choose which test cases I care about as the service provider, because you can go in and modify it. And I would run, I mean, here's the thing too, like CNF is such a overloaded buzzword. Like it really comes down to 2 things. Like almost every CNF is either it's something to do with like the RAN or the packet core in 5G land, or it's some, hokey like Nginx thing that somebody put together to say I have a CNF. So like even CNF is like a tough thing, but I will say, as the lead architect for our container as a service platform and our telco cloud at Charter, I was using the test suite to validate, because I'm mistrustful by nature. I always assume that vendors are pushing what's best for them because they have a business to run, and I would go in and use this as a means of, like doing a sniff test on and I mean, what I was mostly using it for right now is just like, are they in the ballpark? Because nobody has like figured out the CNF thing yet, right? But like, are things just completely like puking on themselves? Do they pass some basic things? If yes, okay, let's pass go, collect $200 and start moving down the Monopoly board to see where we land. I hope that helps.
Yes, yeah, thanks for that.
And how is the planned CNCF CNF conformance testing comes to this picture? So is it also planned to be like a set of selected CNF test suite tests?
Yeah, so that comes down to, and I don't really know what we want to call the name here. We've been referring to it as the CNF certification program. Mm-hmm. Whatever the name means and everything else. There's the concept and idea of trying to help take all these tools and all these things and say, if you put it all together, then you can have some type of verification that could be communicated to someone like Jeffrey when Jeffrey was at Charter. Now Jeffrey probably would go, that's nice, I'm going to run it myself since y'all make the tool available, which is fine. We've had other folks at other SPs actually talk about using it for onboarding. But let's go back to whatever this thing is. So right now, CNF certification program. It is in process right now to be officially launched over the next, I guess, like 4 to 5 months. We'll probably have the full announcement for the certification at KubeCon EU. And what that is entailing is using the CNF test suite. The working group, again, is supplemental documentation. Anything in the certification, so let's not just think the test suite, whatever the certification program, however it looks, will be pulling content from all, the different places. So all the working group, everything else that's been there, the test suite, those cloud native principles papers, anywhere that it makes sense. So the certification itself will utilize the CNF test suite for the mechanics of actually testing. So when someone walks through the process, it's probably going to look similar to the Kubernetes conformance certification. Similar. I'm not going to say the same, but similar. A minimal set of steps. And I'm not going to focus on all the, signing up and doing anything like that. I'm going to focus on more of the technical side. You'll walk through some set of steps like you do with Kubernetes conformance. And for those who aren't familiar, it's it says, go get Sonaboy, the project software, which is a VMware project. Download that and run with its set of tests. Sonaboy can actually run many different things, but it says run it with the Kubernetes conformance set of tests. Well, the CNF certification will also do something like that, where it will have a set of tests. And I mentioned there's over 50 now. So right now we're going through and deciding what out of that 50 will be part of this certification. So some subset will be part of the certification, covering, there's 7 categories now, including security and resilience, availability, configuration, all those sort of things. 7 categories. There will be tests in all the categories, and those tests will be running for the certification program. Thanks, Jeffrey. And at the end of that, there will be some type of results, and the scoring, whatever else, that's all still being decided on. But at some point, you'll have, I passed, I succeeded, whatever, or I need to make improvements. Oops, I'll stop there for a minute. I think I accidentally muted. I hope I didn't mute myself while I was talking.
No, we can still hear you.
Yep.
We hear, yeah. So
Okay.
so no worries there.
I'll stop
the
there
technical
for a minute.
difficulties that you feared did not occur.
Okay, great. If I'll wait, and if there's any questions before, I can try to provide some more details on it. But did that answer as far as like what's being used for the certification slash?
So there is an
Yes,
intention to have a badging program specific to CNFs using these tests within CNCF itself.
Yes.
Okay.
And specific to going back to the early comments, I think everybody kind of made different comments along this, including you, Gerge. This is all what I'd call it is baseline. This is before you go in and someone says, we need to cover these additional things for further interoperability. Vodafone says, we use these things. We need people to make sure that they're compatible with it. Great. So these are the baseline things that should be applicable on any environment, any Kubernetes environment, and including, of course, Anuket as a baseline. Non-root processes, to bring that one back up since it's on both the test suite and the working group side. Okay, there's applications that could run with and without root on Anuket, just like any other Kubernetes. And what the certification would be saying is, we recommend that you don't run processes root. And if Anuket Assured wanted to have something like that, then it would just be, okay, include it. if it's something where it needs to be an exception because there's customers that say, nope, we have to have it. Okay, well then we've actually started a process in the working group to say, you need to communicate anytime you have exceptions, but a baseline, Heather, it's a baseline.
Cool. That is very useful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Do you think that there is a need for some kind of synchronization between all of these? Because as we discussed in the beginning of the meeting, we would need to have a bit better coordination. So I just trying to figure out how to achieve that.
I think a meeting.
Sure. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, I think we need to have better coordination or more coordination between what Anuket is doing and what CNCF is doing. I mean, the CNF certification program. I'd like for I'd like an opportunity for the two groups to talk about how Anuket RC2 and the CNCF, yeah, the CNF certification program could dovetail from each other. I don't know that it's a reasonable expectation to do that, at least initially, but I think we're missing the mark if we don't do that. Come up with a way to make sure that those two groups are familiar with and aware of each other completely. So that would be my first blush at it. Taylor, I'd be curious to hear what you think.
I'm all for collaboration, and I think. Well, I'll just go from that, and then I have another comment. So we've been engaged on the Anuket side since very early. Heather and I have been talking since just about when the CNTT, well before the RC2 happened, and that's why
I was going to say, I think we go back even further than that.
Yeah,
Taylor.
we do. I mean, if we go into ONAP and everything, definitely specific. So we've been involved, and I mean, Heather, the way that I approach this is trying to get people to at least understand each other well enough to see if they can work together, or if they can't, then it's actually, examine why, and then it's fine, we step away. But I try to break down those barriers. That's my thing. So I definitely want to do that. What happened in about February, March, I can't recall, in 2021, there was some, I guess, decisions / not, maybe some indecisions on whether or not RC2 was going to include workload. We had actually been working pretty heavily. We were on a lot of those meetings. We worked on trying to get it working with the RC2 test framework to be able to run the test suite along with other tests that were happening. That happened. It was merged. There was a lot of other stuff there. And we were trying to contribute into the RA2 for the workload stuff. And it looked like I guess maybe probably the biggest thing that I saw, without being on all the calls, was maybe there wasn't enough time and resources for people to focus on both to get Anuket assured to a point where there was comfort that there could be the platform and workload at the same time. So it was paused. There was a request to kind of pause and stuff. So that was the main thing. So we just stepped back and kind of waited. And Heather and I, as you know, we've continued to chat through 2021, try a little bit. Everything's been a difficult time and pandemic's still going, but definitely still open for it. And I, as a kind of addition to those things, or related, going back to the very start, and something that I, maybe a little bit of a disagreement, it's my viewpoint, with something, Gergely, you've stated that I take a different viewpoint. As far as different, multiple efforts, and you can have duplication of work, that's always true. And we would prefer not duplication, of course. But I'm not totally against duplication, because there's, especially when we really look at it and say there's a little bit different goals, there's differences, and you can have different things come out. So I'm okay with that. And at a minimum, with people, with groups and people, I try to get to a point where we can have co-opetition. So we may not always work directly together, but if we're able to share enough and think, hey, we're in this larger environment, and if we make it better overall for everyone, it's going to be better for me, it's going to be better for you. That's a better choice, in my opinion, than saying our group is the one that's going to win. So I first am going to try to seek, how do we work directly together? And then I'm going to say, how do we work in this environment to where we can all benefit? Well before I'm going to ever try to say, this one wins, everyone else loses. So this is my point of view and how I've been, as you know, part of the leadership on all of CNCF's telecom stuff. I've done that. And including pushing back against folks in CNCF that disagree, I've continued to work on things like that. So that's my standpoint. And then I've mentioned this to Heather in the past, but I think there's direct complementary areas where we can look at what's happening in the test suite, and those could be utilized, maybe like Jeffrey was saying, where it's a selected set, or maybe directly with something tied into the whole CNF certification. And Heather, this is more at like a LFN type of LFN CNCF relationship, but I could see some type of thing myself between an Anuket Assured and the CNCF CNF certification for vendors, where they go, we want both because it's showing we try to cover all these cloud native bases, and now we're going to give you context on a specific platform that you can come and utilize and get into specific areas that we've heard from folks like, you know, Vodafone and other service providers say, we are using something like this, give us more assurance. So I know we're at time. I hope that I was able to cover a lot of those specific, how we started Gergely, like how do we work together, and thoughts on that. And if y'all have more questions for me, I'm happy to talk more. Y'all can schedule something with me directly.
Yeah, I think that's what I would propose to do, to conclude the meeting now, because we are on the top of the hour, and have a follow-up meeting, like, I don't know, whatever, within 2 weeks, and then we can continue discussing how to collaborate in concrete terms, let's say.
Absolutely. Yeah, a couple of weeks would be good for me. And I do want to mention what Lucina dropped. She keeps trying to remind me to come back to it. The Cloud Native Telco Day. It's a new co-located event for CNCF that will be at KubeCon EU. So it's not going to be at a different time. It's at KubeCon EU, but it's trying to get more people engaged rather than just, as you've known, Gergely and Heather, we've had like essentially like a tug mini conferences. We've done all sorts of little things in the past, but trying to make it a more organized, partly so that you know, Heather and Gergely, you've put stuff. These events can be a lot of work. So at this point, we actually have the LFN CNCF event team helping to drive it and having different folks on the program for that event. So Cloud Native Telco Day, CFPs are open if anyone wants to submit, so please share that with anybody. And I guess I'll mention if anyone else from CNCF are on there, they're looking for sponsors. But anyways, the KubeCon Telco Day will be very specific to Cloud Native. Go ahead, Gergely.
One request, can somebody post a link to the CFP of the telco days so I can put it to the notes?
The CFP of the what?
The telco days.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know it's somewhere off of that main page, if I recall right, but.
Oh, I can try it.
The link that Lucina put in, sponsor program call for papers. Yeah, it's at the top.
Yep.
Here it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If anyone has topic ideas or thoughts, like for us to say, hey, we need conversations around this at that event, with the idea that this co-located event may bring more people just from KubeCon area. So if we can get more people involved that can answer networking and telecom related things, just let Lucina and I know, and we can try to get topic suggestions into the CFP process.
Okay, thank you.
I know we're out of time. This is Oliver. I don't know if we can maybe just grab an action point here. We're not going to be able to solve it here. I think it's great that we had this meeting, and I think it's great that we have a plan for a follow-up in 2 weeks. One of the things that I think is worth thinking about is who's driving this question until we actually come to some conclusion. Is it RA2? Is it RC2? Is it Anuket Assured? Is it CNCF? Is ONAP involved? So I think maybe it'd be just good to sort of, because I think this is really important. I think most of us would agree this is really important to understand how we move forward. I think it's worth our time to say, who is this, just a loose band of people joining together until we find a solution, or should we kind of also think about a home for this until we, come to a formal decision? So just something maybe we can capture and consider.
I'm gonna try to repeat. I wasn't quite sure. Are you talking about a home for the group of us to work from for driving our collaboration efforts? Or
yeah, well, I think we're going to meet in 2 weeks, right? To discuss further. So then maybe after that meeting, we're going to say, let's meet in 2 more weeks and discuss further. My point is, I want to make sure we understand who, this is a collaboration between Anuket Assured, CNCF. I think it's just worth us thinking about who really should own sort of looking at this collaboration and sort of forming. If we agree that we should be collaborating, I think most of us are saying we need to find the right way to do that. Then I'm just saying we should be thinking about who that collaboration is with, right? I mean, is ONAP involved? I don't know if there's anyone on the call today from ONAP, or is this an RA2 kind of collaboration, or is it Anuket Assured? It's just so that we find, spend a few brain cycles on, creating sort of ownership for finding this collaboration and setting out a strategy for it. That's all.
Yeah, right now I would keep it to Anuket and the CNF certification, or whatever we want to say, CNF testing, wherever it is as far as collaboration. CNCF, Telecom, and Anuket. I would keep it minimal on that. As you know, Oliver, we tried in the past to get a lot of groups involved.
Yeah, Taylor, but
that's difficult.
Yeah. Sorry, that's not really my point, though, is how many other people can join this. I think it's quite the opposite. I'm saying, I think we just need to think about I'm sorry, I'm struggling to, where does it make sense to drive this question? In other words, from what perspective? From this is a collab. So the question, if I ask the question, what collaboration are we talking about between Anuket Assured, which is a conformance program, and the CNCF conformance program? Is that who should be doing this, or should we be looking at it from an Anuket and CNCF, test suite? Or I'm just saying, let's not do it right this week.
My point of view, at least my view, is that this is something between Anuket and CNCF, including both Anuket Assured and CNF conformance and Anuket specifications and the CNF working group. At least that's my take on it.
Yeah. I mean, one possibility, since the Monday CVC meeting, it was, I believe, our intention to have kind of voice of the projects at that Monday CVC meeting, specifically sort of asking RA2 and RC2 to kind of come to that meeting. Maybe we can sort of take up the topic there if no one's sort of raising their hand. I kind of get what you're saying, Oliver. It's like we need sort of a person to feel as though it's their responsibility to move it forward while taking into account the sort of, breadth and depth of collaboration. And I guess, is it sort of, would that be kind of the Anuket TSC, one of the R2 work stream projects, or someone in the CVC committee? So I don't know, we could either take that topic at the CVC meeting on Monday, where it had been the intention to ask the workstream participants to come to kind of dive in to some stuff around R2, actually, I think maybe R1 related stuff, or we could take it in the Anuket TSC. Also, we are considering having that sort of virtual DTF in March that's going to be topic focused, with this likely to be one of the deep dive topics. So that's also another forum where we can continue on a meeting like this as well. Not to say that we shouldn't meet again in this format for an hour in 2 weeks, but I mean, the fact that we're 10 minutes over time means that there's, I think, a lot of deep diving that we need to do. And so that idea of sort of setting aside potentially some calendar time in March to like really dive through this question in a collaborative way. I think we should remember that we likely might have that tool at our disposal to really focus on kind of this conversation. But should we take it in the Monday CDC meeting further, or do we want to make it a big topic for Anuket TSC, or maybe both?
I'd like to suggest something for our next group call as the agenda. I'd like to come together and communicate. I'd like to list what are the goals, the top goals for what Anuket is doing, Elephant with Anuket, or however you want to say that, and what CNCF is doing with Telcom. Like, what are those main goals? And we, from there we can break it down like, okay, what does this mean? And then we can see, well, there's overlap on this, or, oh, this one doesn't matter. It's great that you're doing it, or they're, whoever's doing it, but it doesn't affect anyone. But then we can work on how to collaborate on more specific things. That's what I suggest for the next call.
Yeah, and I think we certainly did need to do a deep dive. I'm sorry, Gergely, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that very good idea from Taylor. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we want to sort of review kind of those links to the test case sort of documentation together. Maybe an RC2 meeting would be the best place to sort of do that kind of look at it together deep dive, like from an Anuket perspective. Scott, is that something you're comfortable kind of raising your hand for, maybe taking on in an RC2 meeting context, or are y'all still having joint meetings with RA2? So it would be maybe you and Ricardo would be sort of okay, maybe using the meeting next week to sort of get together and really deep dive through the test cases to come back with some thoughts?
I would suggest whoever wants to look at it, go check out the test cases, talk about it, look if it's, see if it seems relevant. If there's a set that's irrelevant, then we can bring that. If it doesn't look like it's relevant, then we can come back with either questions, or we can say, it doesn't look like we need to worry.
Yeah, and I was just kind of asking from an Anuket perspective where we might want to do that talking about it, but
Yeah, that could, if someone is able to do it, once you
I was
get
going to say,
some
but I
response
think
there.
Ricardo has dropped.
Yeah. So why
Scott,
don't
are you
go
still
ahead and
here? Or
stop?
maybe I'll just follow up with Ricardo and Scott and Gergely and Lincoln and Oliver, and we can just kind of chat about
Yeah.
where we want to kind of do the sort of reading and talking about the test cases.
Yeah, anyway,
Yeah,
So we can come back with
we-
that feedback that Taylor's suggesting.
From a 50,000 foot view, I think like having Anuket assured or the CVC start to kind of pull the goals from the Anuket side, and as Taylor, kind of indicated on that, and then RC2 is definitely probably the right place to dig into the technical content of the test cases and how those might apply to requirement setting from RA.
All right. I am going to have to drop. I got another call in 2 minutes. I need to grab some water. I'm happy to continue, though, in a couple of weeks, and I'll work with Lucina, and we'll try to come up with a set of here's the high-level goals, and here's how the different initiatives tie into it so that we can see where it overlaps and where there's some complements, we can work together in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. I think that was a very useful start of a discussion.
Yeah,
Thanks,
and
Anuket.
Gergely, from your perspective, as our chair, I mean, I think we do need to sort of read the test cases and talk about them. Do you want to sort of make maybe a suggestion to Scott and Ricardo to maybe use the RCRA2 meeting time slot to maybe do that together? Do you think that that's a worthwhile request for them? Because I think they're both off the call now.
Yes, I think it is. I plan to raise this in the RA2 meeting tomorrow anyways.
Okay.
Because we are focusing on workloads in this fleet.
Okay, cool. Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's all right with me. Thank you all.
Thank you.
No, you are here, Ricardo. I'm sorry. I lost your name in the chat, but sorry, I was not trying to ignore you.
That's all right. No worries.
All right, cool.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
You too. Bye-bye.